state-sponsored drugs cheating. Moscow denies the claim. Also coming up, President Obama orders intelligence agencies to look into reports of cyber attacks and possible foreign influence in last month's presidential election. The leader of the Dutch anti-immigration Freedom Party is convicted of inciting discrimination, but he faces no punishment. And imagine surgery replacing scalpels with just sound waves. That's what doctors have used to operate deep inside a man's brain.
It's a game changer for many of these patients with severe motion disorders. We can, for the first time, do something to cure their motion disorders, such as tremor.
Hello and welcome. The president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, has called for lifetime bans for any athlete or official guilty of being involved in systematic doping. It follows a new report from the World Anti-Doping Agency, which reveals more than 1,000 Russian athletes benefited from a coordinated doping program. It says many of those who cheated went on to win medals at global competitions like the Olympics. WADA says it has evidence that 500 drugs tests which were reported as negative were actually positive. It's alleged that urine samples were routinely interfered with by Russian officials to ensure athletes were not caught. For its part, Russia has denied state-sponsored doping, describing the new claims as baseless. Here's our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
We knew it was bad. Today we found out just how bad. Laid bare how Russia cheated at sport. From London 2012 through to Sochi 2014 and beyond. Both summer and winter sports corrupted across a 4-year period. Canadian law professor Richard McLaren today revealing the full damning findings of his investigation into an audacious state-sponsored doping programme of breathtaking proportions.
The conspiracy was perpetrated from at least 2011 to 2015. Over 1,000 Russian athletes competing in summer, winter, and Paralympic sport can be identified as being involved in or benefiting from manipulation to conceal positive doping tests.
The scandal began in May with the shock revelations of this man, Grigory Rodchenkov, the former head of Moscow's anti-doping lab turned whistleblower. In a barely believable conspiracy that went right to the top of the Russian state, Rodchenkov helped dozens of athletes take a cocktail of performance-enhancing drugs and evade detection. Working in a secret area of his lab, supposedly secure sample bottles were tampered with and positive samples passed through mouse holes drilled by spies before being swapped. Today came more grim details of the plot, backed up by a vast database of evidence. Scratches on the caps of sample bottles from a thin strip of metal used to open them. And further proof of tampering, instant coffee granules added to clean urine samples, salt levels described as physiologically impossible, and 2 female ice hockey players with male DNA in their samples.
The Russian Olympic team corrupted the London Games on an unprecedented scale, the extent of which will probably never be fully established. This corruption involved the ongoing use of prohibited substance, washout testing, and false reporting.
London 2012 was meant to inspire a generation. It was hailed as one of the cleanest and most successful Olympics in history. The Russian team came fourth in the medals table and none of their competitors failed doping tests. But now we know that performance was a sham and the Golden Games were sabotaged. The International Olympic Committee said today the revelations were an attack on the integrity of the Games and that they would retest every Russian sample from London 2012, but others want more.
It's time for the IOC to act. They can take immediate steps to suspend the National Olympic Committee from Russia, who ultimately is responsible for the sports system and the Olympic movement in Russia.
Some critics will now want Russia banned from the next Winter Games, or for them to be stripped of hosting football's next World Cup. Here at this ice hockey match in Moscow today, however, the mood was defiant.
I think that each allegation must be based on concrete proof, and it shouldn't be just a superficial proof, but one based on documented tests.
Some people take banned substances legally and they're not punished. Others are stripped of their medals even if what they are accused of happened a long time ago and has never been proved. It's all political.
The Russian Olympic Committee's annual ball in Moscow this week, a display of strength and of pride. Tonight, however, the country risks sporting isolation like never before.
That was our sports editor Dan Rowan reporting there. Ukrainian police want international help to return a politician to the country who was accused of 100 million euros worth of fraud. Alexander Onyshenko, who was a former Olympian and multi-millionaire, currently spends a lot of his time here in London. He left Ukraine before he could be arrested. He denies all the allegations against him and is now claiming he has evidence of corruption at the heart of the Ukrainian government. The government refutes those claims. Tom Burridge has the story.
Policemen trained by America's FBI and training to arrest powerful people in Ukraine accused of corruption.
Corruption is huge. It's the #1 problem in Ukraine. It's kind of a cancer or a tumor we have inside the country. Only the top officials had officially declared 26 billion in savings, and the majority of these people has never been to business. The majority of these people used to work all their life in the government, in the parliament, and they're billionaires, they're not even millionaires.
So Ukraine created an anti-corruption bureau, and we met the detective investigating their biggest case. We can't identify him. He says Alexander Onyshenko, a politician who also competed for Ukraine at the London Olympics, cheated the Ukrainian state out of more than 100 million euros. Mr. Onyshenko was involved with companies which allegedly bought state gas well below the market value. The detective says the companies were then selling it on at a much higher price and not paying enough tax.
This case is very important. It's not a one-off crime. The scheme functioned for a long time and allowed one person to receive huge profits while stealing from the state.
We were shown some of the evidence against Mr. Onyshenko. He left Ukraine before he could be arrested. He now spends much of his time in London, and we spoke to him via video link.
They have nothing against me.
There are several witnesses ready to testify against you. People who say they were involved in the scheme that you were benefiting from.
They will never have not one witness against me, because I never worked there the last 2-3 years. I was out of the companies.
Your name is linked to some of the companies, isn't it?
Myself, I had nothing to do with the management of the companies.
Why don't you come back to Ukraine and face a trial?
You know my situation. I have fight with President Poroshenko.
Ukraine set up its anti-corruption bureau from scratch last year. The idea is that none of the officers here are tainted by corruption in the past. But creating a new national law enforcement agency is a Herculean task. And so far, no one has been convicted on this new organisation's watch. And if Ukraine is to prosecute those who've left the country, it will need help bringing them home.
The majority of the money flows go from Ukraine to England, to Spain, to the wealthy countries abroad. And that's where they keep their money. And the majority of these countries keep protecting them.
Western diplomats say corruption is Ukraine's #1 problem. But tackling it is easier said than done. Tom Burridge, BBC News in Kiev.
In other news this hour, and British police have found nearly 100 football clubs have been impacted in connection with allegations of historic child sexual abuse in the sport. Clubs from the Premier League to amateur level are now under police investigation, and 83 potential suspects have been identified. The 350 victims so far range from 7 to 20 years old. The Duke of York has issued a statement denying a number of stories, including rumours of a disagreement between himself and Prince Charles over the role of Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. Prince Andrew said he wished to stop speculation and innuendo, and that it was a complete fabrication to suggest he wanted titles for any future husbands of the princesses. Dutch police have arrested a 30-year-old man suspected of planning a terrorist attack in the city of Rotterdam. Detectives found a Kalashnikov AK-47 and 2 full magazines of ammunition at the suspect's apartment. 4 boxes of highly explosive illegal fireworks and an image of the flag of the so-called Islamic State was also found. In Syria, the UN says it's received reports that hundreds of men and boys have gone missing after crossing into government-controlled West Aleppo. It said that there was every reason for concern given what they say is a terrible record of arbitrary detention in Syria. In New York, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution demanding an immediate halt of all hostilities, humanitarian aid access throughout the country, and an end to all sieges, including in Aleppo. Rupert Colville is the spokesman of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Well, this particular group, it's several hundred men. We've been hearing from their families that they left sort of towards the end of November, early December, and simply haven't been heard from since. So what that signifies exactly, we don't know. It could be some have been killed, it could be they've been captured, it could be that some of them escaped, or a mix of all three. All we know for sure is they left and they haven't been heard of. And that obviously is a bit alarming given what's been going on in Syria for the past 4 or 5 years.
Now, the American media giant 21st Century Fox has made a $23 billion takeover bid for Sky, the British-based satellite broadcaster. In response, Sky said it had formed an independent committee to consider the proposal. Rupert Murdoch controls 21st Century Fox, which already has a 39% stake in Sky. Sky's share price shot up over 30% in late trading in London after the takeover bid was made public. Well, our business reporter Samira Hussain has more details.
Well, you know, it's pretty interesting when you look at Rupert Murdoch and just how much he actually owns. Of course, he is a household name here in the United States. Now, he, of course, owns several newspapers here in New York, specifically the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Dow Jones group of papers. But also, he is in charge of Fox News. Now, it's interesting because right now, Mr. Murdoch had to take a more active role in running Fox News, especially during the election. There were some internal difficulties with regards to Roger Ailes, who was heading Fox News, and he was then let go from the company. And so Rupert Murdoch really had to take controlling moves at Fox News. So there's been a lot of movement here in the United States to try and sort of right the ship here. So it's really interesting to see that he's actually making a move for Sky News.
Samira Hussain in New York. The controversial Dutch politician Geert Wilders has been convicted of inciting discrimination. The charges related to comments he made in 2014 when he promised there would be fewer Moroccans in the Netherlands. But the court declined to impose any penalty on Mr. Wilders, whose party is leading in the polls ahead of parliamentary elections next year. Here's Anna Holligan.
Meer of minder Marokkanen? Dan gaan we dat regelen.
These scenes weren't spontaneous. The crowd had been coached by members of Geert Wilders' anti-Islam Freedom Party. It was essentially a stunt designed to maximise the media coverage. The judges noted that there were limits to free speech when that freedom was used to impede upon the freedom of others. They described this as an extraordinary case and said that as a politician, the conviction was punishment enough.
De rechtbank ziet in de gegeven omstandigheden aanleiding.
The court rules Mr. Wilders is a politician guilty of insulting a group and inciting discrimination. The court believes that this is enough punishment for him.
Daarmee acht de rechtbank hem voldoende gestraft.
So there will be no jail sentence or fine of €5,000 as the prosecution had requested. Mr. Wilders responded on Twitter, as he has done throughout this trial, describing the guilty verdict as madness, and then posted this on his Facebook page.
And I have a message for the judges who convicted me. You have restricted the freedom of speech of millions of Dutch and hence convicted everyone. No one trusts you anymore.
A typically defiant response from the outspoken populist who's storming ahead in the polls. And this was the Prime Minister's response.
Een land met onafhankelijke rechters die naar eer en geweten hun werk doen.
A country with independent judges who do their job conscientiously. We have separation of powers, which means that judges do their judgment in cases, and we as politicians are responsible for the control of this country.
Iedereen in Nederland heeft recht op een eerlijk proces.
The Dutch political system means there's always a coalition here, and most other parties have vowed not to work with him. However, he's now 10 points ahead in the polls, and if he gets more votes than other parties, it will be very difficult for them to keep him out of power. He has, though, traditionally struggled to translate those impressive poll figures into actual votes. But if Brexit and Donald Trump have taught us anything, it's to never underestimate the power of the populists. Anna Holligan, BBC News, Schiphol.
President Obama has ordered intelligence agencies to look into reports of cyber attacks and possible foreign intervention in last month's presidential election. That's according to Homeland Security advisor Lisa Monaco. She suggested that while cyber attacks were not new, they may have crossed what she called a new threshold in 2016. Well, let's take you over to Washington and speak to Jane O'Brien, who's there for us. The election was a little while ago, Jane. Why has the president decided now to initiate this investigation?
Well, I think there's a big concern among Democrats that if he doesn't order an investigation, then it'll never happen, because Donald Trump is pretty ambiguous about who he thinks it was responsible for the cyber attacks. In the most recent interview, he said that he didn't think that Russia had interfered with the election, but then he went on to say that Russia or China or some guy at home in New Jersey could be responsible for the cyber attacks themselves. So there is a real concern that once he is in the White House, any investigation will just be swept under the rug, and we may never get to the bottom of what actually happened and who was hacked by whom.
Jane, what's this review likely to encompass, and at some point do you think we'll be able to see it?
Well, it was triggered by the hack on the Democratic National Committee back in the summer, which revealed some very embarrassing emails showing that the committee actually tried to undermine the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, who was Hillary Clinton's biggest challenger for the nomination. That led to the resignation of the party chairwoman. But we now know that this review is actually going to go far wider than that, possibly back to 2008, when it was reported that China had hacked the campaign systems of both Barack Obama and John McCain, who was the Republican nominee at the time. So it's a much broader review. However, whether or not we get to see it, we don't really know, because it's likely to contain some classified information. The intelligence agencies are still investigating, and they're typically pretty sensitive about what they reveal.
Any reaction from the Russians at this stage, Jane?
Well, the Russians say that they would also like to know exactly what the Americans think they have, what information that they have on Russia. And a statement from the Foreign Ministry says after repeated requests for information, they still haven't had any response. So they're waiting too.
Good of you to join us. Thanks, Jane. That's Jane O'Brien with the latest from Washington. Now, imagine surgery without knives or scalpels, just sound waves. That's what doctors at a hospital in London have used to operate deep inside the human brain. The pioneering treatment was performed on a patient who suffers from uncontrollable trembling in his right hand. It could be used in the fight against Parkinson's disease. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh was given exclusive access to the treatment.
Over the past 17 years, it's just got worse and worse.
Selwyn Lucas is a painter and decorator, but his job is being made increasingly difficult by this: an uncontrollable tremor in his right hand. The shaking is caused by a mistiming of the electrical signals, the commands sent from the brain to the muscles in the hand. 1 million people in the UK suffer from tremors.
The last 15, 17 years, it's gradually got worse to the extent I can't use it. I've got to use my left hand.
Early morning at St Mary's Hospital in London, and Selwyn is being prepared for deep brain surgery. But this razor is the only blade that will be used today. This frame will ensure his head is kept completely still during surgery. Once it is placed inside this machine, the first of its kind in the UK, which operates using sound waves. It works like this. The device has more than 1,000 ultrasound beams. When focused on a single point, they generate enough heat to destroy tissue. The target is a tiny point at the base of the brain which is causing the faulty signals which trigger the tremors.
697 watts, 13 seconds, 9,000 joules.
This is precision medicine. The team constantly monitor MRI scans and gradually increase the energy of the sound beams. Selwyn's wife is there to reassure him.
I've witnessed quite a lot of brain surgery, and it is brutal and bloody, drilling through the skull and cutting through tissue. The contrast here is astonishing. There are no scalpels, it's all done with sound waves, and the patient is awake throughout.
And the result? Remarkable. The tremors have gone. His right hand is steady, and this is a permanent fix. Doctors believe ultrasound surgery could treat other conditions.
It could help involuntary movements in Parkinson's, and it could help tremor in multiple sclerosis, as well as other neurological conditions emanating from the brain.
So it has a big future.
It has an enormous future.
7, 6, 5.
This was Selwyn
4,
before
3,
treatment.
2, 1.
And after. It avoids the risks associated with conventional brain surgery, and recovery is immediate.
You've got a big smile on your face, Selwyn.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? Yeah, it'd be brilliant if I can pick someone up with a hand and know it's not going to spill everywhere.
Selwyn's treatment is part of an international trial. Once that's completed next year, there's likely to be huge demand for this pioneering surgery. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Incredible treatment. Colombia's president has described the Nobel Peace Prize as a gift from heaven that gave a tremendous push towards reaching a peace deal with FARC rebels. Juan Manuel Santos has been speaking to the BBC's Stephen Saka in Oslo on the eve of receiving his award.
Just a second, consider for me the impact of the announcement that you'd won the Nobel Peace Prize, because it came literally, I think, 3 days after the reversal that you suffered in the referendum. Would it be fair to say that without that international accolade and the momentum it gave you, you might not have gotten to this point today with a new deal?
It's fair to say, it was 4 days after the plebiscite, it's very fair to say that it was a gift from heaven. And it gave me a great push. And I was in the Navy, and I learned to sail. And when there's no wind, the ship starts to drift. And this came like a big wind that pushed the whole country and me and the whole process to the port of destiny, which was a peace agreement.
Isn't it worrying, though, for the long-term stability of this deal, that you're telling me you probably wouldn't have reached the destination without international support? In the end, it's going to live or fail by the strength of the support it has inside the country. And if it requires the Committee of Nobel to give you the prop that you needed to keep this deal alive, that ultimately is quite worrying.
I've never said that without the Nobel I could not have achieved a new agreement. I have not said that. What I've said is this, of course, encouraged me and the whole of the Colombian people because it was interpreted as a mandate from the international community to continue and to persevere.
And you can watch that full Hard Talk interview with President Santos of Colombia on BBC World starting from 4:30 GMT on Saturday the 10th of December. It will run at various times throughout the day, with the latest airing at 22:30 GMT. Do check your local guides for that. The Hollywood actor Kirk Douglas is celebrating his 100th birthday. His career has spanned 7 decades and highlights have included 3 Oscar nominations, as well as an honorary Academy Award in 1996. Kirk Douglas is best known for his roles in Spartacus and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Happy birthday to Kirk Douglas. Take a look at these stunning pictures now. You're looking at a feathery tail perfectly preserved in amber, which was found by Chinese scientists in Myanmar. But can you guess what it belongs to? I got it wrong. It's none other than 99-million-year-old feathered dinosaur. This is what scientists think the creature looks like. It's about the size of a sparrow, and it's thought to be brown on the top and white underneath. This is the first discovery of a dinosaur material which has been preserved in amber, and will go a long way to revealing more about the development of modern feathers, not to mention shedding light on the extinct species that dominated Earth for more than 160 million years. Well, don't forget, you can get in touch with me and most of the team on Twitter. I'm at Tom Donkin BBC. You can see what we're working on via Facebook. That's facebook.com/BBC/news. There you can see what we're working on and some of the stories we've been talking about today. Well, that's it from me. We'll see you very soon. Goodbye for now.